Welcome, my name is Lynne Deptula. I started decorative painting when I was a stay-at-home mother and decided to do a little crafting perhaps. And at a local quilt shop they were offering a decorative painting class. And I tell you, one class, painting stroke work, and it was a Millie Smith design for some of you girls that have been around for a while, and I was hooked. So I started taking as many lessons as I could and got invited to go to a local chapter meeting where I met my business partner, Judy Deephouse. She was the teacher there. We convinced her to add another class. She was teaching at her home, and the rest is history. We started painting together and just loved it. And when my daughter started school, it was either, okay, now you have to get a real job, or you can continue doing the decorative painting, which you love. So we started painting for some Chicago art shows, 3, 4, 5 day long shows. So we painted 10 hours a day, nonstop. And that's when we developed our style. And you learn to paint a little faster. You learn to use minimal patterns. And it's just so enjoyable. And to this day, 30 some years later, I still love to paint. Okay, I'm going to go over a couple techniques that we're going to use in painting these coasters. We really want to focus on floating here to get your fruits to look realistic and have a little shape to them. It's just a matter of an application of paint in a technique called a side load float or a double load float. So for the side load float, if you have a large flat, anything number 8 probably and up, this is a 16 or a 12. So anyway, you're going to dip one corner into your paint and blend on your palette. And you want to blend quite a bit. I bet you I blend about 20 times on a palette, wax palette, before I touch the surface, because a good float will happen on your palette rather than on the surface. So here's one side of the brush. Now I'm going to flip it over and blend again. So you're actually blending both sides of the brush, but the paint's only on one corner. So blend, 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 blend. And then the corner of the brush with no paint, I like to pinch that, just to take any little extra paint that might be out of there, out of the way. And then when you go to float, you've got a real soft gradation of color to do your side load float on your piece. Now the double load float is very similar. You dip one corner of your brush into one color and the opposite corner into another. See, there's quite a bit of paint on the brush. But when you blend on the palette, you know, when I first started painting, we used to blend nice and tidy, nice little neat little path. Now we like to mess it up a little bit. So I'll walk to the yellow, I'll walk back to the green, flip the brush over, yellow, green, back to the yellow. And you think you've lost all gradation of color between the two, but you haven't. When you go to paint, let's pretend you're painting a leaf here. Here's your chisel edge, pressure, and back to chisel edge. It's a nice soft flow of color from one to the other. That's a double load float, well blended on your palette. So today we're going to show you how to use a very inexpensive 16-cent 4x4 white tile from any Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, wherever, and make some coasters for your home. It's a really fun little project. The first thing I did on these tiles was to spray them with matte spray. You need to have a little tooth to the tile so that the paint will stick. So I just washed them off with a little window cleaner to make sure there was no oil residue on the tiles. Then I sprayed them with a thin layer of matte spray and let it dry for a couple hours. And then you're ready to go. So I'm going to transfer on the pattern, and we use a traced pattern so that you can see through it. And your graphite paper, which when it's brand new, it's really pretty fresh. You can see how dark it is here. So you're going to want to use, and it comes in a really big sheet, you're going to want to use a very light touch to put your pattern on, because we're just using it as a suggestion of where to paint. And you want it to barely be visible so that it doesn't show through your final painted piece. So I'm centering my little design onto my tile, holding my tracing paper down with one finger, and underneath goes the little pattern. And then you're going to use the finest point on a stylus and a very light touch, and you want to just transfer on your main pattern lines. If you press too hard, it's too dark. And then you can always check your work just by picking up the little design. Oop, missed one cherry here. Let's get this guy on too. And then we're good to go. Now any little smudges you might have, you see there's a couple of smudges there, you can just erase those off afterward with a white artist erasable eraser. And they're readily available at any craft store or artist supply. And then on this particular tile, the little cherry one, there are 3 horizontal stripes that I painted as a background treatment. So I'm going to mark those, and they don't have to be totally centered, but I'm just using a little pencil and a see-through ruler, marking through the middle of the tile. Again, I'm using as light a touch as possible. And then we'll kind of split that distance and draw another couple horizontal lines. Real light. And that's just with a regular pencil. And the tile gives you a little extra tooth once you have it sprayed. Okay, so now we're ready to begin. We might as well start with the cherries. We're going to base coat those with 1 layer of paint. You'll find that on the ceramic tile, the paint doesn't stick as well as it does on a wood piece, so you may need a couple layers of base coat color to get it started. But we're going to take a little tomato red, and I'll use about a 6 or 8 flat, and base coat these little cherry shapes. Now you'll find to avoid ridges on the edge of your base coated object, if you stick some paint down in the middle, and then kind of stroke to the edge, you can get a nice smooth base coat color going without any outside ridges. What we want to avoid are any ridges on the outsides of the base coat areas. Now this is covering pretty darn well, so I think we'll get by with just 1 base coat layer on the cherries. Some colors as you paint are more transparent than other ones, and you'll learn as you go along. DecoArt has, I don't know, at least 300 different colors of paint, so you're going to want them all, and then you'll be able to use whichever ones suit the purpose that you're painting. So while that dries, I'm going to continue on and use my liner brush and thin down a little bit of this milk chocolate. Just by using a damp brush, it's touched on the paper toweling for like a half a second, so it has a little extra moisture in the brush. And if you pull out a little of that milk chocolate, make a little puddle of it. And then one of my favorite tips is to take the liner brush and twirl it when you pull it from your puddle of paint. And what that does is twist the bristles back to a nice fine point. So then you're good to go. And actually to pull towards yourself when you're pulling line work makes it flow much easier also. And you're straight up and down. So here's the tip of the liner. I'm going to paint the stem lines to the cherries now. Straight up and down. And you're just pulling towards yourself. And when you get to a certain point, it's too awkward for your hand to make that curve. So just stop and then continue from the other point back in. Only paint as far as it's comfortable for your hand. If you have to twist your hand, then your lines are going to be disjointed, so you want to just take it easy, a little bit at a time. So you have your little stem lines in. Then if you take about a number 8 flat, 6 or 8 flat, got a 6 here, that will work fine. We're going to paint some leaves onto our cherries now, and we are going to use a double-loaded brush. So the way that you double-load a brush is take your little flat, dip one corner into evergreen, the other corner, let me check make sure I'm right here, the other corner into cad yellow. So now you have quite a bit of paint on both corners of the brush. You're going to blend on your palette. A wax palette works great for this. And I like to blend both sides of the brush. Add a little more paint. You want to fill up your brush nicely with these two colors. Evergreen on one side, cad yellow on the other. And as you're going along here and blending, these two colors will combine a little bit and soften back, and it makes for a real pretty combination. And then for these little stroke leaves, I'm just going to put them in with a couple strokes straight up and down on the chisel edge, and then pressure and slide back to the chisel edge. And depending upon the size brush you use, if it's a smaller brush, you may need 2 strokes to fill in your leaf. If you use a larger brush, you may be able to paint those in with 1 stroke. So 2 or 1 strokes, doesn't matter. Chisel edge, pressure, back to the chisel edge. There's half of a stroke, half of a leaf, excuse me. Here's the other half of the leaf. Blend them together. Real light touch when you're blending. I use pressure when I first apply the paint, and then when I want to soften the 2 little strokes together, it's a light touch. So chisel edge, pressure, light touch to round out the back of that leaf. And what you'll find with the ceramic tile, it does have a little slide to it, so it actually makes it easier to blend your colors together and get a nice flow. Always rinse your brushes in water, lay them down. Now I would like to take a little more of this milk chocolate and actually attach these leaves to my stem lines, and they're going to flow nicely off the stem line into the leaf. And it doesn't matter if you pull from the stem into the leaf or from the leaf back into the stem. We'll take a little dark chocolate and paint a little stem hollow where the stem would come into the cherry. Just a little bitty U-shaped stroke to pull that stem into the cherry. I'll also use a little touch of this dark chocolate to deepen the stem lines where they come out of a leaf. Maybe a little hit and miss on the stem line. I'll just give a little more variety to the milk chocolate color. Now that our base coat of tomato red has dried on the cherries, we're ready to start a little shading. So I'm going to take a larger brush, number 16, 1/2 inch flat. The larger the brush, the easier it is to do your little wide side load floats. And you're going to start with a little mix, and I do it right on the corner of the brush. I take a little tomato red. There's a little bead of water coming down the brush. Sometimes that happens. You get your brush, you're ready to go, and you see a little water start to come out of the ferrule and run down the brush. So just touch your brush to the paper toweling to get rid of that. Okay, a little dip into the tomato red, and then just a pin dot of your Payne's gray will give you a darker red, a burgundy color, which will be lovely to shade our cherries with. And you can pick a side, any side, to shade. What I like to do, let me move this out of the way, is stick the paint down and then walk back over it a little bit to smooth it out. What I find is if the ladies start to shade and are right smack dab against that back edge, it's too hard to pull it out. Then you often end up with a ridge of paint at the back edge. But if you will stick the paint down away from the back edge, about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch away, and then lay the brush really flat, you can walk over that, a little pit-pat motion, and soften that out. Okay, now we're going to paint the little background stripes behind the cherries. So I'm going to take about a number 4 or 6 flat, and right out of the water, 1/1000 on the paper toweling, just a little bit of water out. So you've got a little water left in the brush so that you can pull out some of your Indian turquoise, make a little puddle, and then we can paint these little stripes. And what I'd like to do, we can paint right on top of them if we want. If they're light enough so that you've got a real light pattern, you can paint right on top, straight up and down. And as you come along here, I'll just go right on top of the cherries a wee bit. And then I'll take my little damp brush that I have at the ready, or if you have a little Q-tip too, and just clean out those little edges. So you've got about 3 stripes to put along here. 1, 2, a little clean out. And here's the last one. Brace my hand. Whoops. If you run out of a little water, if it starts to drag on the surface, pick up a little more water in your brush, because it should flow really nicely right along that little line. So I can go right over that little leaf. And then I can come back with my damp brush and clean it out. Like a little, it's like a built-in Q-tip. Now we're going to put a little highlight on our cherries. And we're going back and going to do another double load here on the brush. So I've got the tomato red, which I based the cherries in. Blend it on a corner. Then pick up a little bit of that cad yellow. We're going for something a little bit brighter, so it shows up a little bit. And I'm working these 2 colors together on one corner of the brush. You're going for a reddish orange, so they'll show up a little bit. And a little highlight here on one side. Gives a little glow to the cherries. And that's that same side load float that we talked about, where you start away from the edge, walk it back a little bit, little pit-pat motion. Just to give a little, I'm going to flip the brush over here, just to give a little highlight. Oh, maybe we'll pick up a little bit more yellow here. If it doesn't show up at all, then if you pick up a little bit more yellow, then you'll start to see there's a little glow there. And where I love using like about a 1/2 inch flat is if you go outside the line, so you pinch, and here's your little built-in Q-tip. Pinch, and you can clean up any little oopsies you might have. And the only thing left on our little tile are some highlights, and we're going to put a little shading on the leaves too. So I take the liner brush, a little bit of the cad yellow, and just a tiny little highlight stroke in the middle of the highlight area that you put on each cherry. And you're straight up and down with your brush, pressure, and then pick up on that tip. Makes just a little stroke. Then we don't want the leaves to look too flat, so we're going to put a little shading on those. Again, you're going to use your larger flat, side loaded. So that just means, oops, I got a little red on there. That just means one corner into the color, rather than all the way across the brush. A little more evergreen. Blend, blend, blend on your palette. I'll bet you I blend, I don't know, 15, 20 times on the palette before you touch your surface. Then you know the color's well blended into your brush. There's a little water. Real flat. Stick it down. Walk it back. Smooth it out. And you can see what a difference just that little side load float makes in those leaves. Shading the back curve of each leaf with a little side load float of evergreen. Work it in there, and again, pinch the corner that has no paint. That's your little Q-tip for cleaning up any little oopsies. Okay. So there's your little cherries, all finished. Next we'll move to strawberries. Okay, now we're on to our little strawberries, little strawberry coaster. We're going to base coat the strawberries in 1 or 2 coats of your razzleberry. depending upon how opaque it gets on the first coat. So let's check it out here. And I've traced my pattern on so light that it's a little tricky seeing it, but we do want to make it as light as possible so that you don't have to worry about covering up your lines. And here's our little razzleberry. And again, I stick the paint down in the middle and then work it to the outside edges. So you have 2 large strawberries and 1 little guy. So here's the paint in the middle, and then with the brush, you're kind of curving it around here. As you're painting, you're going to find, and we're going to cover stroke work in our lessons for DecoArt, but you're going to find as you base coat, many times your base coating techniques are actually strokes. So now the razzleberry's going on a little bit sheerer than the tomato red did. So when this dries, we'll put 1 more layer of base coat on. So we'll go ahead and do something else a little bit while that's drying. So there's our little base coat. We might as well put the little stripes in the background on while the strawberries dry. And for that, I'm going to use thin sapphire. I'll make sure it's sapphire. Okay. Liner brush, out of the water. Just touch it on the paper toweling to take out a small amount of moisture. Then you pull out the paint to make a little puddle, and it's thinned. Remember to twist your brush as you pull it from the puddle of paint so you get a nice fine tip on it. Then straight up and down with your brush. I always rest my hand somewhere so that you've got a little stabilization point. And a thin little line right along here with your sapphire. And again, you have a damp brush at the ready so that if you go through or get it on a part of your design, you can just wipe it out. And if you thin your paint well enough, you should probably get a couple, 3 stripes out of 1 load. Then go back. I'm trying to figure out where I can put my finger so I don't get into the wetness. A little more moisture on the brush. Load it up with your paint. Twist the tip as you pull it out. Another little tip for doing line work. If you look right at the tip of the liner brush, and I don't know why this is, but it tends to make it wobble a little bit. So if you can train your eye to look just a little ahead of where you're pulling the line, the eye-hand coordination takes over and it makes for a much straighter line. If you don't look at the tip, just look a little bit ahead. I know it seems a little odd, but really does work well. Let's put another layer of base coat on our strawberries. And again, that's with razzleberry. Acrylic paints dry pretty darn fast, just in a couple minutes, which makes them really exciting to paint with because you don't have to wait for things to dry a very long time. And even though these strawberries don't look completely solid in their base coat color, this will be enough of a base coat because we're going to shade and we're going to highlight our little berries, and that will fill them in. When I first started painting, we wanted everything base coated opaque, opaque, opaque. So you'd spend a lot of your time base coating. And now I find to get a translucent quality in your painting, it doesn't have to be a solid base coat. We've got our strawberries base coated. We need to let those dry a wee bit. Now we can pull some stem lines. And again, we're using a liner brush and some thinned milk chocolate. So you're touching on your paper toweling for like a half a second over to your milk chocolate. And we're going to pull some stem lines here, coming down to your strawberries. Remember I talked about pulling towards yourself? So we're going to try to pull towards ourselves, and if we get to a point where it's not comfortable for the hand, like about that far around the curve, then go back up and pull it to meet. It'll make it much more fluid if you don't force your hand into an awkward position. Then for these leaves, we're going to use, let me check here, evergreen and cad yellow still. So it's a double load, so one corner's into your evergreen, the other corner into your cad yellow. You can see I'm being very generous with the paint. Blend, 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 flip the brush over, blend some more. And again, you think you're going to mess up your color, you're not going to have any definition between the green and the yellow, but it just makes for a really nice blend if you over blend your brush. And then we have about 4-ish leaves. Chisel edge, press, back to chisel edge, blend, blend, blend. You can softly blend those two strokes together. Get a nice little leaf. Chisel edge, pressure, back to chisel edge. Here's the other stroke, blend them together. And again, like I mentioned on the tile, it looks a little transparent, but once we add some shading and some stem lines, then you're good to go. All right, then we're going to use our large flat again to do some shading on our strawberries. The first layer of shade. What I like to do, we have these little seeds that we're going to paint on the strawberries eventually. Now you want those to be into the strawberries rather than sitting on top of the berry. So we're going to put one layer of shade, one layer of highlight, then we're going to paint the seeds, let them dry, and go back and shade them again. Then it'll really tuck them into the berry. So the first layer of shade will be tomato red, corner of your large flat, blend, blend, blend. Lots of times you will end up with a little paint that ekes across your brush, and then you'll end up with a hard line on the outside of your painted float. So to prevent that, here's the color on one side of the brush. I'm going to pinch the other side of the brush. Make sure there's no color over there, so that when I go to shade, let me try to match this up here. Okay. The color doesn't come all the way across the brush. So stick the paint down, flat brush, walk back, pit-pat motion, and you can get a nice wide shade on half of your strawberry. Now I might have to rock up on a little corner to get it shaded on that little lower section of the strawberry. Here, I'll do it with this direction too. Stick the paint down, walk back over it. The brush is real flat on the surface. Use a little pit-pat motion. Now if you start to see a hard line, see that line formed right there? Pinch the corner of the brush that had the paint over there, and then go back over that line, and it'll soften it back for you. Up on the corner to shade the little lower section of the strawberry. Then we have a tiny little float in there, so let's just use a little bit of tomato red on the corner of the brush. Now it's smaller. Sticking the paint down still and then walking it back. Little side load float, little touch on that little nubby. Now while that dries, let's go back and shade the back of these leaves like we did on the cherry little coaster. And that's a little evergreen again. More side load floating. That's your little lesson here, is how to side load float to make things look realistic. You're dipping into the evergreen, blend, blend, blend on the palette. See a little red left on the brush. Let me rinse it out real well. Try again. Blot, dip, blend both sides of the brush. Little water on the ferrule, we'll get rid of that. And we want to stick the paint down, slide back and shade the back curve of each leaf. With a little evergreen. Stick the paint down, slide back, and shade. Okay. Now let's attach those leaves to our stem line using our liner brush and some milk chocolate. Again, it's thinned a little bit. Put a little moisture into the brush, pull it out from the puddle, twist the brush, it brings it back to a nice fine point. And you can come off the main stem line and pull a little vein line into the middle of these leaves. What I find you'll want to do is make them slightly curved as they pull into the leaf, and it makes it look much more natural than coming in as a straight line. So a little curve as you come around here. We'll want to take a little of the dark chocolate, where the stem line comes out of the cherry, the stem line comes out of the strawberry. I like to deepen that just a titch. Titch is a technical decorative painting term, so that it makes it have a little more definition. And now we're ready to highlight our strawberries. We've got one layer of shading on with the tomato red. We're going to put a layer of highlight on the opposite side of each strawberry with the terra coral. Blend, blend, blend on your palette. And the same thing with the highlight. You're going to start away from that edge, walk it back. And see, now when you first base coated these strawberries, even though we put 2 coats of paint on, they looked kind of transparent. But by the time we've added the shade and a little highlight, now they're looking more opaque. So we didn't have to work really hard to get an opaque berry to start with, because we're going to end up with an opaque berry after we shade and highlight. Here's a little highlight on that lower section. Stick the paint down, walk back over the edge. There's the nice highlight. Smooth it out. And then that little bitty strawberry, just a little bit on the one side, and a little touch on that little nubby. Then we talked about one layer of shade, one layer of highlight, paint some seeds on the berry, and then we're going to put one more layer of shade to bury them into the strawberry. So we're going to take some true ochre on the tip of a liner brush, and we're going to paint some little seeds on these berries. Another little technique I have for you here is that it's very difficult to paint random. The ladies always want to know, how many seeds do I put on, where do I place them? And you won't win an award for the most seeds on your strawberry. So what I like to do is start with a triangle of 3 little seeds. There's your 3. And then work off that triangle. Now I'm going to make another triangle up here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Another triangle down here. So that you're coming off and you're making irregular little shaped triangles, and now you end up with a random pattern and you haven't had to think too much about it. The same thing for your little well, there's that little bit of brown stem. We'll cover that up with a little. There's my triangle, and then coming off the triangles, making new triangles to get a random look on the seeds. Anywhere, start with your first triangle of 3 seeds. 1, 2, 3 up here, 1, 2, 3 down here. Maybe we'll put another one down here. I like to have them kind of almost going off the edge of the strawberry in a couple spots too. It makes it look more interesting. Then we're going to highlight these seeds. I can hear moaning and groaning out there already. With a little cad yellow, and just tip the top of each of those seeds with a little touch of that cad yellow, and see how that makes them pop out? It seems kind of tedious, but it makes a big difference to put a little highlight on these seeds. A little bit of cad yellow. Just a touch on top of your seeds. Then we'll let those dry for a minute, and then we'll shade back the one side of the strawberry that we already did one shading on. So in the meantime, you're going to paint the little calyxes on your strawberries. So if you have a little number 4 flat, you can even use a little round brush and flatten it into 2 colors. We'll try that little technique and turn it into a little flat for you. So we're going to flatten the brush into the evergreen. This is a little round, and then it turns into a little flat. So if you look, you can see that it's a flat edge of the brush. If you turned it sideways, you get the chisel edge of the brush, which oftentimes I'll use to paint real thin little lines. But right now we're going to paint little calyxes. So flattened into the evergreen and then pulled into, I'm checking here to make sure, cad yellow. So then I pull it through the cad yellow puddle. Now this time I don't bother to blend it really well on the palette, because what I like is when you're painting your little calyxes, which are just tiny little strokes, you get a little hit and miss effect with the yellow. Sometimes it'll show up, sometimes it won't, and it makes for a more interesting little calyx. So you want about 4 of these on the top of each strawberry. So here's the touch, pressure, and lift off. It's the same thing that you did with your leaves, only they're smaller. 1, 2, 3, and here's the foot, pressure and lift off. See, now that one got a little like a smudge of green on one side. I kind of like that. So load it with the green, run it through the puddle of yellow. Tiny little strokes. Okay, and one more layer of shading with the tomato red. And we talked about, now we painted the seeds on top of the berries, now we want them to go into the berries. So if we take the same color we used for the first shade and reinforce that shading and go right over, right over the seeds so it kind of glazes over them, tucks them into the berry, then you can see how it gives a little more depth to the strawberries. Just a little bit. A little more tomato red. You can still see the seeds on the shade side of the strawberry, but they're a little obscured, which puts them into the little piece of fruit rather than sitting on top. So there's our little strawberry coaster. And now we're going to work on the blueberry coaster. Now, like I mentioned before, these are only 16 cents a piece at your little local hardware store. I think it would be nice when they're all finished to get some felt or some adhesive cork that you can cut and put on the back of the tile to give a softer back to it so it won't scratch your tables or furniture. Okay, here we go. On the blueberries, we're going to base all the blueberries with a layer of sapphire. What I like to use is a little 4 or 6 flat, and just base coat your little circles in. And again, we talked about not going straight against the edge when you're base coating, to actually stick the paint in the middle, which is what I do, and then stroke to one side and stroke to the other side. And then you have a little circle that you've filled in. So we have quite a few berries here that we're going to fill in. And this is a fun little technique with the blueberries, because we paint them all the same to start with. And then after we get them shaded and highlighted, we come back and we tint some. And it makes it look as though you've painted different colors of blueberries when you haven't. They're all the same, but with the little tint, it makes them look different. And you can experiment and use different colors on your palette too to tint the blueberries. I use the same technique when I paint grapes, and if you tint some to be green and some to have a little purple, it's really a fun little technique. So we'll get our little berries in, and the sapphire is covering pretty darn well, so I think one coat will be plenty, because you are going to shade and highlight your little blueberries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 7, 8. Oh, one more. Now while those are drying, we can paint our leaves in and we can paint our stem lines in. Okay, we've got one layer of sapphire on. It looks pretty good. It's opaque enough for the first layer. Now this time when we paint the leaves, we're going to do them a little bit different, just to mix it up for you a little bit. These were all painted as a double load, and then we shaded the back of the leaves. This time, let's put the leaves in just as a one solid color, and I'll show how to shade it, and then we'll tint some edges to get a little variety in our leaves. So I'm taking my 4, 6, 8 flat, whatever works for you, and loading it completely into evergreen. And then it's the same stroke. You're on the chisel edge of the brush, press and release. And you've got a little, now this is interesting. Okay, when you put the paint on, if it puddles up a little bit, it's a little wet and you get a little sheerness to it. I kind of like that. Some ladies will work and work and work to get them solid, but I think it's very interesting and keeps the design a little light if you get a little sheerness to your leaves. So here's a chisel edge, pressure, and pull off. And you can blend those together. We have a smaller leaf down here, so it's a little less pressure to get it smaller. And you press a little harder if you want to make them bigger. Press, back to the chisel edge of the brush. It's very important to have nice brushes that come to a sharp chisel edge to get these leaves painted in. We have 2 more. Chisel edge, pressure, back to the chisel edge. Now I'm just going to round out the back of that leaf. And you have time to play with your paint and smooth things out if you want to. You have at least 30 seconds, which doesn't sound like a whole lot of time, but it is in the paint world here. You have a good 30 seconds before it starts to dry to get in there and do whatever you want to do and get out. Okay, so we've got our little leaves just base coated in with 1 layer of evergreen. Now let's go back to our little blueberries and shade one side to separate them with a little bit of Payne's Gray. Now we're back to side load floating. Dip the corner of the brush into Payne's Gray. You want to separate your berries and shade one side. And you can pick and choose. Every time you paint a little cluster of blueberries, it might end up looking a little different with 1 berry on top, 1 berry underneath, and next time it might be reversed. It really doesn't matter. You're going to just stick your little brush down, again, away from the back edge again. And this little guy we would tuck maybe behind the 2 that are in front. So a little side load float. Remember I talked about using the corner of the brush with no paint and pinch it, and then you can clean up any little oopsies you might have. We'll shade this one on the back side. You're going to shade them basically where they're attached to the stem line with a little Payne's Gray. So you're going to come in here and shade your little berries. Little side load float. Starting to run out of a little paint. Use my little Q-tip. Clean up any little oopsies. Reload. And if it, this is a good little tip too. If it beads up on your palette and you get a lot of water in your palette, that means you've got too much water in your brush. So just blot it a little bit. Pick up paint again. And now you can see it's beading up on your palette, but not really, really wet. So then that's perfect for shading. Stick your paint down, corner of the brush, smooth it out, a little more paint. Blend, blend, blend. Stick the paint down, walk it back to the edge, smooth it out. All with your Payne's Gray. We're going to finish up here, first layer of shading on the blueberries with a side load float of the Payne's Gray. So again, we'll tuck this one behind the front 2 and just curve that back with a little side load float. And you want to shade the half of the berry where it's attached to the stem line. Maybe this one will tuck behind a little bit also. Payne's Gray, pinch. That's my little Q-tip. Clean up that little edge. And we'll let that dry for a minute, and we'll come back to our leaves and shade our leaves with a side load float of evergreen. A little bead of paint coming down the handle, we will take that off. Keep your eye on that, because if it comes down and hits your paint, then it's going to make your paint too thin, and then it won't stick to the surface as well as a properly loaded brush. So again, sticking the paint down in the middle of the leaf, walking it back, just curve out that back edge, little side load float of evergreen. And we're going to show you as soon as this dries how to tint these leaves. And that can be really fun, because you can use any color on your palette to tint the little leaves, and it makes them look real pretty. Here's the one that we put on that I mentioned it being a little splotchy, and how that was just fine. So once we get that shaded and highlight it, it'll be great. We're still waiting for those blueberries to dry a little bit, so let's put the little branch that the blueberries are attached to in. And we're going to start it with a liner brush and some milk chocolate, thin down. So there's a little moisture in my brush going into the milk chocolate. Again, twist the brush when you pull it from the puddle of paint. Now when you're coming along here, I'll have her close her right in on here. Here's my little branch coming down. It helps if you're a little nervous when you pull this line, because then it wiggles a little bit, makes it look like a more realistic branch. And at the very top of the branch, to make it look like you just plucked it off the bush, I'm going to sit down with the brush a little bit and make a little slug of paint, so it's a little bit thicker at the top, so that it works. Now here, we're coming down here, there's a little piece of branch sticking off the bottom. We have to swing a little bit of branch over and make sure we catch these berries. Here's a little branch coming into the leaf, so that every berry's attached to the little piece of vining. So there we go with that. Now I think our berries are dry enough to highlight. And this time we're going to use Indian turquoise as a highlight on the opposite side of each blueberry. Shaded one side, highlight the other side with Indian turquoise. So another side load float. Blend, blend, blend on your palette. And again, the same thing, you're sticking the paint down a little bit away from that outside edge, walking the color back, and smoothing it out. There's my little Q-tip to clean up any little oopsies if I go outside the lines. Now right now, when we do the highlight on the berries, they're all looking the same color. But once we put our little highlight dashes on them and glaze them, like I mentioned before, this is really a fun little technique, because it'll look like we painted different colors of blueberries when in reality we didn't. Little side load float of Indian turquoise. And you'll notice I'm getting quite a few berries highlighted, 6 berries with 1 load of paint. Side load float of Indian turquoise. All the berries. Then when this is done, we can go and we're going to tint the leaves. Now I'm going to use a little cad yellow to tint some of the leaves. Oh, I see a leaf that's hanging out here that needs to be attached too. We'll get that little guy in just a minute. So here's a little side load float of cad yellow. And if you come along, pick a side, any side of your little leaves, and just brush a little bit of that yellow on there. So then it gives them a nice little glow. So that's another technique you can use to get a little variety in your leaves. We've painted them as a double load, and now you can paint them and you can tint one side too. There's a little yellow. We'll just smear. That's one of those technical painting terms again. Smear a little cad yellow down there. Now let me come back and attach this one leaf that's just hanging out here. There we go. Now really should make sure that we can see those little stem lines coming into each leaf. This is with the milk chocolate. There we go. Make them show up. A little highlight dash on each blueberry. I'll use the liner brush. A little bit of Indian turquoise. And again, it's a tiny little stroke. Just touch with the tip of the brush. I'm putting the highlight stroke in the middle of the highlight area on each little blueberry. Okay, so you've got a little highlight. Let's let this dry for just a minute before we tint them, and let's put this background treatment on. And this is a fun one. It's just little dashes with the razzleberry. And remember how when we painted the strawberries, we talked about the triangle of seeds and then working off those triangles to get it to be a random kind of look? That's what we're going to do with these little dashes, sets of dashes. So I will start, anywhere, and I'm going to stay with the same angle as I come along here. So here's one little set, here's another little set, and then the third set would be maybe over here. So now I have a triangle of little dashes. And then I'm going to work off there. There's that 3 for a triangle. Make another triangle here. 1, 2, 3. It's nice if you have some just kind of disappearing off the edge of your piece. Also 1, 2, maybe another little set here. 1, 2, another little set here. 1, 2. Well, let's put another little set down there. So you're going to come along here and put in little sets of dashes. You could do polka dots. You could do little X's. If you wanted to make a set of coasters for, let's say, 4th of July, you could paint the blueberries and you could put little stars in the background. Would be really cute. Little red hearts, little yellow stars. Whatever your little heart desires. Okay, we maybe have one more in here. Maybe it's a little one coming off the edge up there. Oh, see, now I'm getting carried away here. Okay, there. Now we'll stop. That should do it. Now for the fun part. Taking my little 6 flat and some real sheer diazinon purple. Pulling a little bit of that out. It's a real sheer on the palette. And pick a berry, any berry, and glaze over it with the diazinon purple. Now it makes it look like you have purple blueberries and regular blue blueberries, but in actuality all you did was paint them one color and pick some to tint with the purple. And there you go. Our last little coaster is the lemon slice. A little bit of sunshine in our day. First thing we're going to do is base coat the lemon slices with 1 layer of cad yellow. And again, I'm using a brush that's just touched onto the paper toweling and then loaded fully with the cad yellow. And we're going to go right over our little pattern line here. And the yellow's pretty sheer color. So you will be able to see your pattern line through the base coat. 1 layer of cad yellow. And you'll notice the outside edge of the lemon rind is not a perfect circle, so it doesn't have to be painted perfectly. And just be kind of loose on the outside edge there. 1 layer of cad yellow. Now while that's drying, let's go ahead and put in our background treatment on this tile. And that's with a liner brush in diagonal lines of terra coral. So I'm leaving a little moisture in my brush, pulling out a little bit of that terra coral, to add a little bit of water here to make a nice little puddle. They always say you're supposed to thin the paint to an ink consistency, but really, who uses ink anymore? So I just say thin it with a little water so that it's going to flow nicely off the end of your brush. When you're pulling your line work, if it bleeds out, you know you've got too much water in your paint. And if it pulls and doesn't flow nicely for you, then you need a little bit more water. But anyway, got to rest your hand on something. So I'm going to use my hand as a little anchor here and horizontal lines of terra coral. So the paint's thinned a little bit and you're coming along here with your little lines. It's going to skip over my leaves. I just used a see-through ruler to transfer my lines. And the best ones are a quilting ruler that you can get at your local quilt shop. And they have markings on them in 1/4 inch markings. So it's really easy if a pattern calls for a 1/4 inch wide border, you can see right through the ruler. It's real easy to mark with a see-through ruler from a quilting store. I do believe Hobby Lobby carries them, as well as Michael's in their sewing department. But what I did was put some horizontal lines with the terra coral. Then I came back just to fuss them up a little bit and broke that line hit and miss with a couple little dashes, tip of a liner brush, of the terra coral. Not too many, just a few. I try not to make them line up right in a row here, so this one will be offset, those two, and then it's that same little triangle treatment thing again here. I think that should be plenty. Okay, by now your little lemon slice is dry. So I'm going to come back here, and to get these little sections of the lemon painted in, I'm going to side load into some true ochre. Using that 16-inch flat, number 16 flat, or 1/2 inch flat would be great. And then you are going to take the chisel edge of your brush and slide out to the edge of each little lemon section, a little wiggle, and slide on the chisel edge back in. Now you've got like a little wedge of shade. Then while it's still wet, if you take the sharp chisel edge of your brush and pull it back through that true ochre, it makes little texture lines in your lemon slice, which works really great. So I'm coming out here, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the lemon. Chisel edge of the brush, get some little texture lines in there. There's a little bitty slip of a lemon wedge in here, which we can't really see, so we'll just put a little something in there. Here's another one, chisel, pressure, back to the chisel edge. And while it's still wet, use the chisel edge of your brush to kind of slide back through that. Makes it look like it has a little texture. Then we have a few sections to put in the actual lemon, the full lemon slice. Chisel edge. You notice how when I come out, you're starting real narrow with the base. It fans out at the outside edge, and then you're real narrow when it comes back in. Chisel edge of your brush. Little wiggle. How many are we going to fit in here? You know, you're coming along, you're painting them in. If my pattern has, let's say, 6 little wedges, but you only have room for 5, or yours are perhaps a little narrower and you have room for 7, then just go ahead and put them on. You just want a consistent little pattern coming around your lemon slice here. And you'll notice how I'm leaving a hole in the middle of the lemon slice, and we're going to deal with that in just a minute. You're coming around here, little wiggle, slide back on the chisel edge, and while it's still wet, I have room for 2 more. Wiggle. Lime slices are fun too. I painted those with a nice vibrant light green. But it's a really summery looking little fruit. Okay, so you have your little lemon slice, the little wedges shaded in. Now I want to put a little highlight on these individual little wedges. So I'm going to take the liner brush and a mix of the cad yellow. Let me get a little moisture in the brush there so we get a little puddle. And then pick up a little bit of your warm white and mix it into that yellow. Oh, I'd say about half and half. Half yellow and half white. Warm white. Then from the middle of your lemon slice, you're going to pull some highlight lines out here. These are real thin and they fan out on each little section. And now you're getting a little highlight on these lemon sections. Right on the tip of your liner brush. The paint's thinned a little bit so you get thin little lines. And generally what I do is pull right down the middle of that lemon section first, and then a few shorter, longer, doesn't really matter, some little short ones, some little longer ones on either side of that first middle line. So here's our line, and some short, some long, just real feathery and light. With your mix of warm white and cad yellow. And again, I'm pulling from the middle out, and that makes sure that your lines end up nice and thin on the tips when you're pulling out. If you started pulling from the outside in, they'd be thicker on the ends because it's more of a blunt end. So make sure you pull from the middle of the lemon slice out to keep your lines nice and light. Now when it dries, if it fades away, I can see as it's starting to dry, it's fading away a little bit, it dries a little softer. I might come back with a liner brush and a little stronger warm white, so not so much yellow. And I might pull a few more in there because I want this to show up. When it dries, if it fades away, give it another little hit of the warm white, less yellow into it. And that kind of depends on how heavy your base coat is too. If your base coat is a stronger yellow, then the softer yellow will show up better. But if it's kind of sheer, like mine was, then you need a little more warm white in it to make the little highlight lines show up. Okay, once you have that finished, then we need to define the middle of our lemon slice. So I'm going to take a little flat and true ochre, little side load float. In the middle of our little lemon slice, I'm just going to paint a little bitty C-shaped side load float, just teeny tiny in there. And that will make it look like there's a middle in the middle of a center in the middle of our lemon slice. And then to finish the lemon rind, I'm going to reinforce it. Now I'm loading up my liner brush pretty heavy with the cad yellow. So I'm coming along here like a thick line of cad yellow. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to tip right into that warm white. So I've got quite a bit of paint on the corner of my brush, and I'm going to hit and miss along here with the warm white. I like to sometimes tickle it down between the little lemon wedges a wee bit to separate them. Okay, let's go back out to our main lemon slice. Here we are coming along. Nice thick line, little nervous thick line of your cad yellow. Then pick up some of your warm white. No need to wash the brush, just pick it up. And come along here and highlight, hit miss with a little bit of that warm white, tickling it down between the little sections. Here's another little spot. What I like to do when you do the little highlight with the warm white into the wet yellow is that they blend together, and sometimes it's a little stronger, sometimes it's a little lighter highlight, and it just gives a lot of interest to the little lemon slice. We're going to finish up this little outline rind on the lemon, a little thick line of cad yellow, picking up a little bit of the warm white, wet into wet, and I also like to tease it down in between the lemon wedges just a wee bit. And we'll let that dry for a minute before we separate the lemon slices. So we have some leaves we want to paint in here to accent this piece. So you'll use about a number 6 or 8 flat into evergreen. Now we're going to paint some leaves behind our little lemon slices, just so it doesn't look so stark on our little coaster. And I'm going to use, this time I'll move to the number 16 flat into some evergreen. Thin it with a little bit of water so they're sheer. And you're going to, same technique, you're on the chisel edge of the brush and press down and come back to the chisel edge, and that will make your little leaf shape. So we'll have about 2 of those little leaves on one side and 3 on the other. I like to break it up, you know. Can't do even numbers all over the place. You have to break it up and do little odd numbers. Makes for a fun little project. And those are called your little one-stroke leaves. You have to let them dry a little bit, but while they're drying, I can certainly pull the little stem lines into them with a liner brush and some dark chocolate. Thin it down a little bit, make it flow well, and pull a little stem line. Oops, let me make it show up. Put a little stem line and sit down at the end, and you get a little nubby. It's another technical painting term. So a little curved line and sit down to attach these little leaves to your design. And you can pull from the leaf in or from out into the leaf. So we're going to let those dry, and then we're going to come back and tint them to highlight them a little bit too. But in the meantime, let's separate these 2 lemon slices. Right now, if you kind of squint, you can't tell which one's on top. So let's put the little half slice behind with a little side load float of milk chocolate. And I'll use my number 16 or half-inch flat in just a small amount of milk chocolate. And if you come on that background lemon slice and shade next to the full lemon slice, it will pop that one in front. Real soft side load float. All of a sudden one little lemon slice goes behind and this one comes forward. Then we need a little highlight or tint on our leaves. This time, because we talked about using any colors that are on your palette to make it interesting and carry the colors around your design, this time let's use a little Indian turquoise. A little side load float. And pick a side, any side, with a little blush of Indian turquoise. That adds a nice little dimension to our leaves here. little blush up in the tip there, maybe down one side. Oops, there's a little oopsie, so there's pinching the corner of my brush, wiping that out. That's my built-in little Q-tip. Indian turquoise. Okay, I'm going to let these dry for just a minute because I do want to shade the back of the leaves with some evergreen. But I wanted to show you how to finish the edges of these, and you can paint them any color you want. But it's kind of a rough little edge here. Let me see, I'll turn it like this. So what I like to do is take a flat brush and load it fully into paint, and I used evergreen when I painted the edges here. And I just came along like this and fluffed in a little evergreen, and I'm not worried about it getting on the top edge of the tile because I'm going to show you what I'm going to do here. So I've got it all there, and then this is where you take my little finger and run it right along that edge, and it cleans up that edge and smooths it all out. So now you've got your little edges all painted with the evergreen all the way around. Then one more thing on our little lemon slice coaster, and that's to shade the back of the leaves with the side load float of evergreen. Again, we're sticking the paint down in the middle of the leaf. Well, not in the middle, about 1/4 of an inch from the back edge. And then we're walking it back, and this will help you round out the back edge of that leaf at the same time you're shading it. That one looks a little wet. Let's use that little corner of the brush with no paint to clean it up. There we go. Then I do need to talk about finishing your coasters to protect them for use. So when all your design is dry and your paint is all dry, I like to use a white eraser, like an artist eraser, and erase any visible pattern lines. Now, pattern lines that are underneath your design may not come off unless it's really sheer paint, and then they'll come off. But generally, you're just going to take a white artist eraser and lightly erase all your pattern lines. You can go right over your painted design. It's not going to go anywhere because the matte spray gives it a little tooth so that you can paint right on top of the design. Brush off your eraser markings. And then I do like to take the matte spray again and mist them a couple times to give a nice layer of varnish on top so that your damp glasses won't ruin your painting that you work so hard on. And again, like I mentioned, I would take a little felt or a little cork, adhesive cork, and put a little back on the coasters so they don't scratch your surface. But anyway, I hope you enjoy painting little coasters. You could use these designs on fabric if you wanted to paint a little apron to match, placemats, wood, anything your little heart desires. You have a wonderful time. Thank you.